It begins with a line through the dark that refuses to behave like a line at all, a stroke that should have been clean in Newton's language, but instead quivers with a hint of grammar we don't yet speak. For weeks, astronomers turned the sky into a ledger and tried to reconcile the sums, positions against time, angles against light, a moving point against the map of everything else. At first, the entries balanced. A hyperbolic visitor, third of its kind, swept in on a path whose eccentricity sat comfortably above 1. The numbers breathed. Approach velocity in the tens of kilometers per second relative to the sun. Inclination that made a mockery of the ecliptic. Perihelion distance settled by the sun's furnace. We nodded and said, interstellar. That single word carries the weight of everything beyond us, and it is both thrilling and humbling to put it on an object. Then slowly, the arithmetic began to disagree with itself. An observation here, a correction there, and the residuals, the little ghosts between prediction and reality, refused to die. We measure our honesty by our errors. These errors felt honest and yet unkind. What arrived was designated by the protocols we trust. Third interstellar, tagged by our vigilant surveys and nicknamed for the watchful telescopes that first rang the bell. Names matter less than the geometry, and the geometry said this: it came from the direction of no single obvious birthplace, not from the galactic plane in a way that would have reassured us with ordinariness, not from a known stream, not from the debris of a broken exoplanet cast out by some sullen star. Its speed, even after we dismissed our planet's motion and the sun's tug, still carried surplus, hyperbolic excess, the telltale remainder after gravity has had its chance. But if the broad strokes painted familiarity, the finer brushwork refused to stay within the lines, the objets. Seat brightened oddly, not with the exuberance of a volatile, rich comet, but with a staccato that hinted at jets starting and stopping, perhaps, or a surface that turned facets of sunlight toward us like a gem rolled between finger and thumb. And the timing, this was the whisper under all the numbers, the timing brought it past certain vantage points of our fleet of instruments as if the sky were a choreography and we unaware we were part of the dance. We have instruments for questions like this: spectra to sift chemistry from color, ephemerides to project the next hour's position from the last minute's motion, models to fold the solar radiation field and the breath of the solar wind into quiet forces that nudge ice and dust. The photons we stole from its coma declared the usual suspects in muted tones: hydroxyl whispers, dust scattering, a continuum that suggested fine grains rather than boulder hail. Nothing screamed alien, nothing soothed either. The orbit fitters drew up the classics: a 6-parameter state vector, gravitational only fits, then non-gravitational terms, A1, A2, A3, to absorb the push of outgassing and sunlight pressure. For a while, A1 and A2 could be coerced into respectability. But residuals are stubborn teachers. They remind you that a small misfit at one end becomes a gulf at the other. Millisecond deviations at discovery expanded into hundreds of thousands of kilometers of position disagreement months later. Not catastrophic, but enough to make serious minds pace the hallway at night. If it were a garden-variety comet, the cure is simple. Assume jets, assume anisotropic outgassing, assume a lopsided sublimation machine whose thrust flickers as the object tumbles. The physics is elegant. Gases serve as reaction mass. Sunlight gives the energy. Torque couples to spin, and the whole ensemble yields a mild, continuous acceleration that is weak but noticeable over astronomical distances. We have seen it, we catalog it, we trust it. Only this time, the thrust vector wanted to point awkwardly, sometimes aligned with the sun, sometimes not, sometimes as though the body were responding to something besides heat. A tumbling shape can do that if the jets are locked to specific vents. Yet our best fits to the light curve suggested a spin state that should have smeared the thrust directions more evenly. Picture a baton in the hands of a dancer who sometimes changes grip mid-twirl. The music stays regular, yet the baton's ends trace paths your intuition misreads. That was our sky, regular solar rhythms, irregular response. The least incendiary explanation is always the first draft, outgassing from a strange mixture, volatile pockets opening in sequence, fragments splitting off and briefly propelling the remainder before melting back into invisibility. We tested that draft. We looked for diagnostic gases, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, the trace fingerprints that tell you which ices are at work. The signals were thinner than one would expect for the measured non-gravitational acceleration. This was a puzzle we've faced before and will face again. Now, in the absence of gas, perhaps the area-to-mass ratio is higher than we assume, a flake rather than a stone, a pane rather than a pebble. When sunlight pressure can compete with gravity's whispers, you need a geometry that presents generous surface with frugal mass. You do not need a silver sail to accomplish this. Nature can knit fractal foam-like structures that trickle out of the frozen chemistry of exotic worlds. But we should then expect a scattering behavior in the light that tells on such a structure, and here the trail went faint. The spectra did not shout sail, nor did they absolve the hypothesis entirely. If it is not a leaf, perhaps it is a bristling seed. We must be honest about coincidences. Sometimes they are just the way the numbers fall. Sometimes, though, coincidences collect themselves into a pattern you cannot throw away. When this object crossed the inner system, a cadence of other events chimed in sympathy. Solar wind sectors flipped. The heliospheric current sheet twisted tighter. An ion storm ticked instruments into safe modes for hours at a time. A communications blackout at precisely the worst solar elongation for amateur follow-up took away the sky when we needed it. A conspiracy-minded poet could make more of this than is warranted. A sober scientist lists them side by side and says, improbable, yes. Statistically damning, no. And yet even the sober scientist admits that when our space telescopes swing to calibrate or dodge a glinting Earth, we lose moments that matter. It doesn't take malice to produce a gap, just the ordinary friction of a complicated world. The object slid through those gaps as though it could read our operations schedule. That perception, even if untrue, changes the emotional charge of the data. You feel watched by a rock. You laugh, then you look again. Gravity remains the bedrock. We return to it always, and it does not disappoint. A body on a hyperbolic trajectory around the sun follows a conic carved by a simple ratio of kinetic to potential energy, dressed with angular momentum. Planetary perturbations graze that conic, bend it a hair, make the tidy hyperbola wobble like a drawn line traced by a hand on a moving train. We computed every shove, Jupiter's far tug, Saturn's far whisper, the tiny pulls from Venus and Earth and Mars, even the pressure of sunlight and the outflow of charged particles from the sun. We computed relativistic corrections for the sun's field. They are small but not dismissible, a few arc seconds of precession that would have been a lecture topic to Einstein if comets had been his obsession. The object's path laced through this web with a grace that was almost balletic. Almost. Because where gravity is a tireless accountant, the ledger lines showed a smear. Accelerations that either required a very specific vent geometry and thermal model or the kind of area-to-mass ratios that begin to make engineers at their drafting boards sit up straighter. If you can surf sunlight, you can write with it. And if you can write with it, you can choose your punctuation. There is a chapter in every investigation called the blackout. It comes for mundane reasons. The object falls too close to the sun from our viewpoint. The glare blooms, the air wobbles, the telescope schedules bow to other priorities. The moon intrudes with its broad, careless light. During the blackout, legends spawn. We do not like to watch the night without us. When the blackout broke, the new observations slid neatly into a trajectory that an optimist could fit and a pessimist could distrust. It was like waking after a brief nap on a train and seeing the landscape still moving, still correct, and yet somehow feeling you had missed a tunnel where something changed. The space agencies released updates that were careful, precise, and gave no reason to panic. They also gave no comfort to those looking for a tidy bow around the anomaly. Data repositories showed what they always show: numbers, uncertainties, caveats, happiness at a good night on a clear mountain. Between those numbers, the story many wanted to tell was that something had been edited. The more patient story was less dramatic and more profound. We were up against the limits of our seeing, and the universe was gently reminding us of that fact. To speak of other possibilities is to walk a thin ridge above valleys of foolishness on one side and timidity on the other. One possibility is that we have not properly understood how interstellar comets age. Cast adrift in the dark for tens of millions of years, their surfaces irradiated into fragile skins, their interiors riddled with pockets of chemistry that awaken irregularly, they might behave in ways our solar comets rarely do. Another possibility is that these travelers are not random at all, that stellar nurseries, by their architecture, inject debris preferentially along certain angles of the galaxy, seeding spiral arms with invisible rivers of rubble that occasionally wash through young planetary systems like ours. If you fly in a river, the wind will seem to help you. A more audacious possibility peers out from behind the curtains: light-weighted structures designed to ride photons, derelict or deliberate. You do not need intent to make a sail. A graveyard of such devices would shed fragments for eons. If intent is there, we arrive at the edge of a question we are not yet mature enough to answer: how to distinguish between nature playing with the same toolkit and intelligence playing with it better. Some will ask, why does it matter? The object has passed. It will not return. Our lives do not hinge on a pebble from elsewhere. But the answer lives in the trajectory of our species as much as in the trajectory of the rock. If non-gravitational accelerations can whisper louder than we expected, our models for interstellar traffic must adapt. If nature gives us sails, engineers will copy them. If intelligence gives us sails, engineers already have. The spacecraft we dream of, thin as a whisper, broad as a field, riding the pressure from a star, would write hyperbolas and parabolas across the map with the same ink we suspect on this object. The physics is not magic. Radiation pressure is simply momentum exchange. The Yarkovsky effect is merely uneven thermal radiation acting like a sub-Hidden thruster. Outgassing is a comet's own rocket equation. But scale these effects properly, align them with a shape that plays well with light, and you arrive at a craft whose fuel is sunrise. To find such signatures in nature is to be licensed to build with a cleaner conscience. To find them in artifacts is to be licensed to wonder differently. Our greatest liability in these stories is the human appetite for revelation. We love a hidden truth because it flatters the part of us that wishes to be chosen. Yet the hidden truths in astronomy are rarely conspiracies and mostly thresholds, changes in sensitivity, in cadence, in coverage, after which the universe looks newer mainly because we see it more completely. The surveys that comb the sky now are better than their ancestors by orders of magnitude. They generate torrents of motion that we must classify, fit, and file. In that torrent, anomalies are, or should be, frequent, because at the edges of measurement you discover how you are measuring. It is no insult to our agencies to admit that some nights are lost to weather, that some cameras are offline, that some pipelines are tuned for one kind of quarry and less adept at another. The courage is to publish the uncertainties as faithfully as the means. In the archive, uncertainty is not an apology. It is the soul of the record. This object's uncertainties acquired an aura, but aura is just the shape of our ignorance backlit by our hope. What remains then is to prepare. The sky is not stingy. Interstellar visitors do not come often, but they will come again. We will greet them with not just one pair of eyes, but a swarm, ground telescopes whispering to space observatories, rapid response probes asleep in safe orbits waiting for a ping to wake and burn for a rendezvous. It is no longer science fiction to imagine a small interceptor, pre-fueled and patient, leaping onto a trajectory within days of discovery, guided by a skywatch system that can predict the future 2 steps faster than the object moves. We will load such craft with spectrometers that can smell a molecule in a coma of ghosts, with magnetometers that can read the script of charged dust, with cameras that can turn a point into a world. If we are judicious, we will keep a second interceptor on the pad, one that carries a wafer-thin sail to see if sunlight alone can serve as both highway and handbrake. The future we prepare for is not just one of answers, it is one of better questions asked sooner while the ink is still fresh on the heavens. The meaning of an anomaly is never contained entirely within itself. It propagates outward into our philosophies and our myths, threads into our sense of scale and solitude. We learned long ago that the earth is not the center, that the sun is one among many, that our galaxy is not the flock, but a single bird. Interstellar visitors are messengers from that wider flock. They tell us that the space between stars is not empty. It is a trade route for the cold and the ancient. Sometimes the messengers wobble, and we are tempted to ascribe intention. Sometimes the wobble is simply the complex sum of simple things, but in both cases, our response can be the same. Sharpen your tools. Feed your wonder. Do not be content with an equation that fits if your night walks insist it does not explain. The spectacle of a dark object riding with light across our sky is a reminder that the universe is both patient and impatient with us. Patient in how long it gives us to learn, impatient in how quickly it moves while we do. There is a last image I cannot shake, a room of quiet humans looking at a screen where a white dot is slightly not where it should be. That slightness contains multitudes, the teamwork of observatories spanning continents, the calibration arcs and backgrounds subtracted, the models stacked like a cathedral of assumptions. In that room, someone says nothing for a long time and then says, "It's off." Those 2 words carry the lightning we chase. "It's off" is not an accusation. It is an invitation. It does not demand a villain. It demands a better theory, a better instrument, a better schedule. It demands the humility to consider sails and seeds and river debris from other suns without surrendering to fantasy, the discipline to recheck the pointing and the clock and the pipeline without surrendering to cynicism. If there is a hidden truth here, it is hidden in plain sight. The cosmos is under no obligation to be legible to our first draft. Our work is to keep writing drafts until the trajectory makes sense, not because mystery is intolerable, but because understanding is the deepest form of awe we can offer back to the dark. We will meet the next visitor with less panic and more precision. We will move from surprise to study in a single week, then to a rendezvous in a season, and perhaps to a sample in a year. Along that path, our definitions will evolve. Comet may come to mean a spectrum of architectures, from porous snowballs to filigreed sheets to relics of machines that once felt the push of a distant star as their captain. Our textbooks will gain a chapter that children will read without knowing it was once unthinkable, and they will ask better questions than we did because they will be born into a bigger map. And we, older and still craning our necks toward the night, will take pleasure in the way their questions force ours to stretch. Perhaps one day we will aim a sail of our own at a nearby star, and in its faint reflection we will glimpse the ghost of objects like this one and understand that nothing was broken in our equations, only incomplete. The sky is not a riddle to be solved once. It is a language to be learned forever, and every interstellar traveler that refuses to fit our grammar is a new set of verbs. We end where we began, with a line that isn't quite a line. The visitor has gone now, dwindled to a magnitude too faint for all but the most stubborn mirrors, slipping outward into a darkness that is its birthright. The fits are archived, the papers are written, the arguments have cooled to a careful ember that will glow again with the next discovery. If this path was intent, then intent and physics are not enemies, they are co-authors. If it was natural, then nature is the most extravagant author of all. In both cases, meaning meets mathematics and produces a feeling that is neither victory nor defeat, but a widening. We followed a dot and found our notions of force and form tested. We found our institutions capable but limited, earnest but imperfect. We found ourselves, as always, small and bewildered and full of appetite. In the great ledger of the night, the entry closes without a tidy reconciliation, and that is all right. There will be another entry tomorrow. There will be another messenger eventually. There will be in every age a small group of people looking at a screen and saying, "It's off," and then going outside under the honest sky to chase what that means.